Oh, hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Here it is. Oh, about 8:30. The sun is going down. It was a nice sunset. It's going below the hills, but the sky is still purpley blue. And how are you? Um, yes, well, we had a nice show last night, and I did a morning show earlier before I went around and did my errands. And I've been just kind of watching the what's going on in the world, and I keep telling people what is going on is what has always been going on. You look at the dynamics of Israel, the Middle East, and the Arab nations and the Persian, Iran, and how it's stacking up. Iran, Russia, China are BRICS, and they're going to say to the oil guys, listen, we showed you that America, you can't trust them. They'll never take care of you. You can be part of BRICS. Instead of selling your oil in dollars, which are worthless, we're going to put it, China's going to back its yuan in gold, right? And so that'll be the new currency, right? The new oil currency. And if Donnie, Donnie should just, okay, well, we did our best. We won. See you later. Bye. And just leave, right? And then Israel would have to become real. The people would have to stand up and go against the Zionist dynamic and say, get out. We don't want to die. And then they would go to the Palestinians and the Lebanese and the other Arab neighbors and say, listen, why don't we, there's enough here for everybody. Why don't we get along? We're sorry. We didn't mean to do this. We had bad leadership, but we want to make amends. Now, if they did that, that'd be the change. China has the opportunity to be the peacemaker. They could really do that, right? They could go to, Israel and basically, put on their TV, put on their everything and say, listen, guys, you're about to be totally broke, right? The United States is already broke. They can't support you anymore. And, Iran is just going to nibble you guys away, right? And if America tries to put boots on the ground, I mean, Iran wants that because they would just eat them up. Because you'd have to bring, right now, our aircraft carrier groups are in the Indian Ocean. They're 1,000 miles away from Iran. So if they really want to put boots on the ground, they're going to have to come in within 200 kilometers of Iran in the sea there and send aircraft off those aircraft carriers going, to take whatever they're going to put, wherever they're going to put the boots on the ground. And it's, the war with Iraq showed that Iran is very hard to invade. It's not like all those Arab countries that are just, it's not like Israel, which is the size of New Jersey. It's one big sandy postage stamp, has no real drinking water. They have to desalinate everything. And they're a ring of cities and then kibbutzes. But it's in the size of New Jersey, right? Whereas Iran is the size of Western Europe, right? There's 97 million Iranians, and they're Persian. They're Iranians. There are Christians in Iran, and there are Jews in Iran, and there are Muslims of different sects in Iran, and also Buddhists, and there are a lot of different religions, and they're all first and foremost Persians, right? So and once being attacked as they have been, Israel and America couldn't have done any better job of bringing Iran together. Yeah, a lot of people don't like the IGRC and the mullahs and all of that. But those guys, if you go there, I've been there, right? I've been there in the 70s, right? When, no, I was there in the 80s, actually. Meaning, once the Arabs got in there, I was there, right? And yeah, so my globe trotting was between 1969 and 1988. So, and I went all over the place. So sometimes I have to think hard when and where I was. But pretty much, I mean, I was in Syria, I was in Iran, I was in Iraq, um, Lebanon, Beirut was a beautiful city, and I was in Israel too. And Israel is a beautiful place. I was there when you could walk or take a bus from Israel into Palestine, into the Gaza Strip, right, and the West Bank, and all the Arabs who lived there, the Palestinians who lived there, they were the working guys. They were the guys building the high rises and the houses and the factories, right? And so there was no wall, and they were kind of getting along. I mean, there are, out of the 6 million, Israeli citizens, 2 million of them are Palestinians, So anyway, all you have to do is just go back and read, and YouTube and our internet, which I don't think is going to last that much longer, right? The United States, like someone is tinkering with our water and our utilities, right? And our utilities, because 1972, basically, Rothschild basically bought America, bought all the utilities, right? They're not public anymore, or very few are. And, Bill Clinton did more to destroy the United States than any other president other than Woodrow Wilson, right? And if you go study what happened, between the Civil War and 1980, you can see how the United States stopped being even pretending and being a republic. 1871, the United States became a corporation. The country is a corporation, not a government. We're not we for the people. That was always an illusion. And why I love Donnie Trump is that he proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence were always, and a bait and switch. I mean, if you're black, you were property. If you were women, you were property. Even if you came from a rich family, you were still chattel, right? Women didn't get to vote until 1928. Many states didn't give them the vote until the 1964 Voter Rights Act wasn't just for black people. So people have to, take a look at what's going on. See that it's the same old same, right? And Donnie Trump was put in there to be thrown under the bus. He's just a game show host. All the chuckleheads who are in his cabinet, they don't have a clue what they're doing. That's why they could destroy the government. That's why they took out whatever illusion of, guardrails and norms. And we have no norms. We have no safety net. We have none of the above, right? And this election that's coming up, why Donnie's not even worrying about it, except he's just going on and on. We have to, he's just going to say, no, I don't believe it. Whoever gets in, he's just, because all that little Mike has to do is fire the clerk in Congress. And that's it. Congress doesn't exist anymore. Everyone goes home. Period. Then what do you do? Oops. Virtually every politician or someone says, you don't vote, you don't have a right to talk about this stuff. No. Someone left a box of donuts on the sidewalk today, and people were looking at, how long has this been here? Is this okay to eat? And, I was looking at it. I said, no, you shouldn't eat this stuff. But you know what it is? It's a metaphor to our new, our upcoming election. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, look at those donuts. They're kind of chocolate. They were like a Boston cream pie with sprinkles on it, right? Donuts. And I said, the only choice. Look, see how this donut has red sprinkles, and this one has blue sprinkles, and this one has white sprinkles. That's the level of choice you have in voting. What color sprinkles you want on your chocolate cream pie donut? And it's been on the sidewalk for a long time, and it could be poisoned, or a dog could have shit on it. But people were like, ooh, I want that donut. It's like, that's how nuts people are. Even if you buy the donuts at the store, they're still going to kill you, right? But having a box just on the sidewalk, and there were people standing around, oh, no, they look really tasty. Oh, I want one, And they were like talking amongst themselves, should I eat that? Maybe. And that's a metaphor for our government. That is our government right there, a box of chocolate donuts with different colored sprinkles. That's the only choice you're going to get. Because no matter who you vote in, the Democrats, they haven't done squat. Meaning, when they had the presidential election in 24, and the girl with the squeaky voice, the Democrats put her up. If JoJo, the used car salesman, had run up against Donnie, the chump, game show host, JoJo probably would have won. But they took him out at the end of his rope and put the girl in. Now, if they put Bernie in, Bernie surely would have won, right? If they put Buttigieg in, he would have kicked Donnie's ass. But both times Donnie got in, he ran against someone that he couldn't lose. One was Hillary, the most disgusting person. And she went to 4 states in the last, month of that contest. She would have won. She won the popular vote. She lost the electoral vote. And that's, we're the only country in the world that has an electoral college where someone can win 6 million popular votes more than the other guy, but still lose because you lost the electoral vote. That doesn't sound like, a fix. And that's been part of our government since the Constitution. It's just, come on, wake up. See what's going on. So 13 minutes and 13 seconds. And no one's here yet. And so come on, subscribe. Give those thumbs up. Come to the show, right? And go look at all the other ones. I was looking at them. My shows on my Dreamy Dreamland with Sensie Owl Bob channel. I got them all the way back to when I started doing it back in 2016. But the bottom line is, I do this show because I am the pebble in the pond of the World Wide Web, right? It doesn't matter how many people watch. It has its effect, right? And the spirit comes to me, and I basically tell the stories, right? So most people have no idea what's going on, right? Or what it is. And, Gene Roddenberry, his job before he started working for Desi Lou, being a script doctor, he worked at Naval Intelligence. So he still worked at Naval Intelligence till the day he died. So you should see all the other shows he did, like Earth, Final Conflict, or, he had some really interesting shows, not just Star Trek. He had a whole bunch of other things that were kind of interesting. And there's been loads of really interesting things. Spielberg had a TV show about, majestic, and there was another thing called Dark Skies. That was around for about 2 or 3 years, I think, on NBC, and that was a bit too close to the vest. I mean, it was like pretty much telling the story. Why did Jack Kennedy get whacked? It's because that day he went to Texas to go to the whatever they call that big conference center, and basically spilled the beans. Due disclosure, and that's why he got whacked. And there was a NASA scientist who he was going to give one of the American flags from the White House to him, because that guy was one of the guys who made first contact with aliens back in the 30s and 40s with Tesla, and the Manhattan engineering project, right? They were doing shit like that, time travel and going off, and Indiana Jones, digging up really strange artifacts. That they were doing that. That's one reason why Adolf Hitler succeeded the first 2.5 years, 3 years of his Barbarossa thing. Why he just blew through Europe, because his boys went out and found the Spear of Destiny. Then, good old Winston Churchill, who was like a warlock, he basically got his OSS guys and stole that away, right, in about 1944. And if they put Adolf Hitler in charge, you should read, I was reading Mein Kampf and looking deeper into the whole history of how World War I led to World War II, which led to the Cold War and the creation of anti-Semitism. That word didn't, who invented that word? It's not, you don't find it in the Bible. Bottom line, everyone who was in, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution that, killed the Tsar, basically, were Jews. Stalin was a Jew, Lenin was a Jew, and again, Jews aren't the Hebrew nation. There's a little cul-de-sac in there between Nazareth and Jerusalem, and it was called Judea. It was just a little cul-de-sac, it wasn't like. And the 12 tribes, they all had neighborhoods, right? So Judea, the people from Judea, they were Jews, right? But, the Jews were the chosen people, God's people, their God, right? Because the God that, the Abrahamic God, it's a jealous God. It's a mean God. It's a cruel God. Really? Would God be all of those things? That sounds very human-like, right? Very anthropomorphized, right? My feeling of the source of all things is just that. It's the source of all, and the dynamic. So if you go read the works of the Essenes and the Gnostic Gospels, the Essene Gospels, Gnostic Gospels, there were many, many sects, right, who were Jewish, who were Christian, who were Islam, before the Bible, and in the beginning, meaning that energy, that dynamics, right? So go read the Essenes, and go read the other thing you should go read is the Haile Selassie, what's the name of that country where the Italians invaded in the 30s? Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Bible. Go read that. That has like almost 80 books, whereas the King James has 66. So, but it's the same book. So why did they take out those 20 books? Or plus, right? Why did they do that? Because they talked about, there's a gospel by Mary Magdalene, right? And she came from a really high-end family, and she and her girls basically financed Jesus and his 3-year tour, right? So, so anybody wants to say anything, like last night, you guys jumped in and it worked, and I didn't have to push any special button. People just started making comments, right? So 20 minutes and 20 seconds. I love it when that happens. There's one person still there. No thumbs up. Come on, you one person. How about a thumbs up? But anyway, and all of that stuff, all of those books are on the YouTube. Oh, there's 4 people. Hey, 4 people. We're talking about esoteric things. We're talking about flying saucers and aliens and all of those connections right to our government and what's going on. I would say we're going to have Spielberg just put out a movie about disclosure. We're going to have before the end of this year, which is only a few months. It's August, September, October, November, December, like 4 or 5 months. We're going to have that. And I don't think we may have an election, and it'll be kind of nasty because, ICE will be everywhere. And if they don't like the way you look, they'll beat you up or shoot you or arrest you. And, so they'll, unless you're wearing a MAGA hat. So, and people watch, so much shit has gone down in the last 18 months that are so broken every norm there is. 18 million people don't have any health care anymore, right? We're going to have a mixture of 9/11 and the COVID situation and the oil embargo of 1972 in America. That's not going to be like end of times, but it's going to be uncomfortable. How comfortable were you for COVID, right? Do any of you remember what it was like waiting on lines for gasoline? So how about when they start shedding electricity, right? You only get electricity for 3 hours. Half of the world gets electricity for, like look at, what people are going through in Cuba. And basically, if Donnie keeps doing this shuffle, and all he's doing is grifting the stock market. He in the last 18 months he's made close to $4 billion personally, and the rest of his chuckleheads have also been grifting away. And on his truth thing, he now has, if you pay him, I don't know what it costs, but millions. He will give you the heads up about what he's going to post at 5 a.m. so you can, either put a put in on a stock or buy a stock that will be jacked up by what he says on Truth Social, right? And he's, so like something like 24 times he said, oh, we're going to bomb the, end their civilization, blah, blah, blah. And basically, just 20 seconds before, it's going to happen. Oh no! We're going to give them some more time because we're in secret negotiations and it's going to be real good, right? And then Iran says, no, we're not talking to these clowns. And like just a few hours ago, Iran responded from the bombings that they had of last week, and they hit Israel, right? And they took out Israel's, Israel is always going on about, like, especially in the Gaza Strip, they obliterated the Strip, well, everything, every school, every hospital, every house, because they said, oh, Hamas was underground, and under those people's houses was Hamas, so we had to like raise the whole, right? Well, Israel really does that, right in their capital city there, right between two very large apartment blocks is Israel's Pentagon. Our Pentagon in D.C. is like right on the edge of the Potomac, a big park around it. Nobody's around it, right? But it's very pretty. I used to have my lunch over there by the Potomac when I worked at the Library of Congress. Anyway, So Iran hit that. It hit a part of the capital city where their like stock market slash high tech. It's like their version of Silicon Valley, but like the business offices, not the manufacturing, but the like central corporate headquarters. And this is one neck of the woods of their capital. It's like K Street in D.C. They had all these corporate centers and banking and all of that kind of stuff. They hit that, took it out. The other thing they took out was the third largest diamond selling on the planet is in Israel, in that their capital city. They took the diamond, so blew it up, and the diamonds are all over, down in the drain and all over the sidewalks, and those, they didn't go after people in apartments, but they went after those three things, and their missiles were so accurate. Yes, those explosions, boom, took that stuff out, and the shockwave, yes, broke a lot of glass down the block, and yes, if you were out on the sidewalk at 3 a.m. when this happened, and all that glass is flying through the air, you'd be kind of cut up like bologna. But most people have their little safe rooms in their apartments, and they get a little thing over the phone, and they got 30 seconds to jump in the room. Anyway, so it didn't have a lot of people dying, but they had destroyed their economic system, their banking, their investment, all of that, their Wall Street, their diamonds. And it took out, a lot of people died in their Pentagon, a couple of high-end generals. And I would say the next thing that Israel's going to do is because they can hit southern Lebanon, where the IDF is, and just obliterate where the Israelis have been. And Israel has just been like taking all the little towns in southern Lebanon and going up to their yellow line, up to that river, and past it. And not Hamas, the guys who were the fighters in Lebanon, they have drones, and they are, giving Israel a hard time. They're losing a lot of soldiers, to the point where those soldiers are just walking away because they're realizing that their generals and the political structure isn't supporting them, and they're just dying just so Bibi won't go to jail. So Israel's gonna, they have a very fractured political structure, right? We have a singular political structure, right? Theirs is all over the place. And the only thing that keeps Israel alive is that, AIPAC has basically bought every politician in America. So we're coming up to some very interesting things. We're about to have, they want another $90 billion to keep fighting the war in Iran with no idea when it's going to end. And they want another $1.7 trillion. Well, they just got $1.2 trillion like 8 months ago, and they want another $1.7 trillion, right? And in that bill, if they pass that bill, one of the things that will happen is Israel and the United States military will be put together as one. So we can have IDF soldiers on our streets shooting us. Those same people who shot all the people in the Gaza Strip that, use little babies' heads as target practice. In your nice little town in New Jersey, you'll be walking down the street with your kids, and, the IDF will just be, doing unmentionable things that they did. And, they practiced up in that's the Gaza Strip was just, practice, right? Plus entertainment. They actually put, bleachers up on the hills so the public from Israel could come and watch the soldiers. When they had those cages of food and people lined up and were coming to get it, and then they would shoot the people as they were trying to get the food. They had bleachers up on the hill watching the soldiers do that. The Israeli people watching that. Now, don't believe a word I say, right? And everyone's left. Um, but whenever, all through history, whenever things like that occur, things always come back. Now we have paid, your tax dollars have paid for all of this, right? You're oh, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a, whatever. No, you are supporting a very, very dark thing in humans, you know, history. And the United States will be remembered. And we've been doing this since 1492, right? It's nothing new. And, instead of having Make America Great Again, we have to have a new, let's make America great right now and into the future. And we can do it. America has one of the greatest things about America is we have great potential. But it takes the people. You can't just, I vote, I spend, 3 hours every 4 years just, getting online and voting, twice, the midterms and the end, the presidential, twice every 4 years, you spend about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and that's all you do to be an American. And some people, but you don't vote, so you can't be an American. You have no right to say it. I said, no, I have a right to say something because there's a thing called the First Amendment that says you can say something, right? Now, I'm what is known as a loyal opposition, meaning I don't want, revolution. I don't want to have a civil war. I don't want people to get violent in the streets, I've never been part of that. The anti-war movement, I was never that, I was in religious, like during the Vietnam things, when I just saw people doing stuff like that, and like I grew up in New York City, so they were always having kind of things like that, right? Like rallies and marches, and I would watch it. And I was, at 16, I started working for Ralph Nader's NYPIR, New York Public Interest Research Group, right? And that's really where I learned about politics and law and strategy and history and things of that. And it was really great because the Riverside Church was the center for any kind of organizing like that. That was a great place. I used to hang out there. And Columbia, I used to hang out in that place. And Hunter College, that was always loads of fun. And so I was exposed to lots of these people. And on the same side, when I was 10 years old, my parents lived on Park Avenue. I would walk my dog down. They lived on 69th Street, where what was it called? Really rich people's apartment house, or what was that? It had a fancy name. It was a very fancy place. They did your laundry. They had restaurants there. It's like living in a hotel. And I would walk, take the dog down and walk 69th Street, because we lived right on 69th Street between 3rd Avenue, and I guess that was Lexington or Madison. And Hunter was right there. And then there was Madison, and then I think, or Lexington. And then there was Park Avenue. Then there's 5th Avenue. There was the Central Park. And I would walk my dog down there. And right on the corner of Park Avenue and 69th Street is the Council for Foreign Relations. And it's like, a medieval castle, right? They don't have doors like coming from the sidewalk. They have this big gate on, I guess, 68th Street, so on 5th Avenue, kind of go in there. And if you were, wanted to come up town, you'd have to go on 69th Street, go down Broadway or Park Avenue. Anyway, so it was on either 69th Street or 68th Street that they had this gate. It was like a garage door, big metal thing. And, the limousines would come. Somebody saw the them on the TV camera. They pushed the button, the gate would, only way to get in, right? They had other secret ways, but that was the only kind of semi-public way. And on 69th Street, it was this, big, the whole building, like 2 floors was like no windows. And so, like I said, it looked like a castle, medieval castle. And, but right on 69th Street, there was this gigantic, plate glass window, which wasn't a plate glass window. It's like curved. So when you walk by it, it looked like there was no window there. It looked like you could just walk in there. And that was Automation House, Billy Kluver's Automation House. And Billy Kluver was part of Council on Foreign Relations, and he was the, their house, I don't even know, wizard, I guess, So he was a guy who went and studied in Europe in the 20s, and he brought modern art back to America and did the Armory show, right, in New York. He came from a rich family, almost a, Gilded Age family, and a Tartarian family, and so he put on this art show in the Armory, and so that Armory became the Museum of Modern Art on that same site, right? So he was the guy who brought that, right? But he also worked at the Rad Lab. He also worked at the Manhattan Project, which was around like way before the atomic bomb, right? Because Manhattan Project was called Manhattan Engineering District, right? And that district was like from the mountains of Appalachian all the way down through, the Palisades into the backside of New York, into Long Island, all the way out to Montauk. Some really squirrely stuff underground there. Go read Preston Nichols' book, The Montauk Project. Anyway, and there were all kinds of esoteric groups in New York City. The Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, the Thule Society was there, and in Soho, right on Spring Street, Spring and Worcester, there was a building, and it's either the green door, the blue door, or some kind of colored door. It's a big building, and it had every kind of esoteric group there. And I was part of this group called the U.S. Psychotronic Society, and that's where we were playing with Tesla toys and, paranormal experiences, right? We were trying to build technology that would facilitate a paranormal experience, right? Because one man's magic is another man's science and another man's religion. And that's kind of how it works in the illusion of the material world. And so at an early age, so when I was 10, I was walking by the CFR and I kept looking in that window. And I remember one time, because like I said, it has this curved window, so you don't have a reflection, so it looks like there's no window there. But you would try to step in there and you would hit this trough and you'd fall down. And then you'd look up, you're like leaning on this, it wasn't glass, so it's like, must have been some kind of plexiglass or something really strong, because the first time I walked in, I went head first into the thing. It didn't smash, but I ended up down in the bottom of this trough, and my dog was just kind of looking at me, shaking his head, and I kind of crawled out of there. And so after that, I never tried to do that again until one day, because I would go by, and sometimes you'd look in there, and it wasn't lit up. You couldn't really see what was in there, right? Sometimes, man, the thing was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was like, whoa, what is going on in there? And me and my dog would just sit there going, ooh, what's that? And one of those times, I'm looking in there and go, wow, look at that. And some guy goes, who I didn't even notice, walked up behind me, and he says, that's kind of interesting, don't you think? I said, yeah. So what is that? He goes, well, did you ever read Alice in Wonderland? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, it's a rabbit hole. I went, what? And he goes, yeah, just step through. I said, I've already tried that. You fall down, you end up down here in the gutter, and he goes, no, 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 go ahead, go ahead. And he had this little fob in his pop, and he hit the button, and I basically, first I went through, and bang, I'm down in there, and he steps in, and he goes to my dog, come on, boy, let's go in. And so my dog jumped up in there, and the three of us are in there, and basically he shows me around. And this is like, I guess, when did they move there? Maybe 63, 64, maybe 64, 64, 65. Anyway, and he had every kind of laser and hologram, and I mean, just really. Now I've been playing around with Tesla stuff. I made my first Tesla coil in my grandma's basement in Long Island, around 1959, 1960. And so I kind of understood a lot of stuff, and I kind of understood what it was. And he goes, this is my laboratory, right? It's like Mr. Wizard. And he goes, I see you coming by here all the time. What's Manhattan House, that's what it was called. And he said, and your parents live in there, don't they? I said, yeah. Right. He goes, yeah, I've been watching you. And he goes, and you're a smart kid, and you're not like the average guy. And I'm always been, I always look for apprentices. And he goes, and your mother is taking you, Grandpa Stahl and Mike Stahl, right? Mike Stahl's shop over on 3rd Avenue, 57th Street. He goes, oh, yeah. Anyway, so that's how I got into the CFR and that whole scene. And he also knew, Cardinal Cushing, who was my godfather from birth. I mean, literally, he's not only was he pouring the war in my head, but my Uncle Steve was holding me, but he was the guy who always kind of looked out for me. He had plans for me to be a rocket scientist for the Pope, right? I was going to be, a Marinol, right? Not, stay away from those Jesuits. Anyway, so that's always been in my DNA and in my life, stream, right? And so I've never really worried about anything because things were always so out of the ordinary. And I pretty much, from the time I was 2, I kind of felt that dynamic of, source, not God. Not some guy on the golden toilet up in the sky. No. I was more, feeling that space. So the more I opened my heart to the Holy Spirit, which is, so if you read the Essenes and the Gnostic texts, they kind of go in deep. And if you go to my channel, Dreamy Dreamland with Sensie Owl Bob, and go to it, and there's this thing up there that kind of says, Al Bob's had this channel for, this many years, and this is how many subscribers. Come on, you guys need to subscribe. And anyway, you basically go there, and you see all the things I look at, right? My streams, my threads, all the stuff that is on YouTube that I look at. Now you go that, and it really goes almost to the time I got onto YouTube, in 2016. So it's got a ton of stuff. So just start looking at the stuff that I look at. And there are a ton of YouTube shows that have all this esoteric theology, philosophy, history, technology, and all the shows are there. Not all of them, but all the ones I look at. And again, just like Billy Clover said to me, this is just like a rabbit hole. You go look at some of those YouTubes, it'll get you down a rabbit hole. Go listen to Cliff High, or Chris Hedges, or, Neutral Country, Neutral Planet, something like that. So just go look at all the shows I have there. There's some Wendy Webb, or whatever her name is. She's got glasses. She's really a good researcher. There are a lot of really, and Grace, truly Grace. That's another. But a lot of the people I used to watch, they're no longer on YouTube. They've been, chased off into being, on whatchamacallit, Patreon or one of those things. Anyway, so we live in an extraordinarily interesting time. If you study history like I have, and the esoteria like I have, this is really an interesting time. And if you are here and you are consciously intent to be connected to Source, because you realize you're here for a spiritual reason. You're not just here to jerk off. Yeah, you jerk off every now and then. I mean, you're just a mud puppet. It's you rub that flesh and it kind of feels good. But the older you get, you don't have those hormones anymore. So it's like almost a futile gesture. It's more like remembering the good old days. But what's important isn't sex. Sex is reproduction. What's important is consciousness and intimacy of that consciousness. And that's what Source is about, being intimate with you, with inside your consciousness. And you're what you think you are? No, it's an illusion. It's a simulation. It's we're just here to be used. But you don't have to be used. You can be the decider. You can actually kind of realize who and what's going on. And there's so much information out there. You can educate yourself. Don't believe anyone. Don't believe me. Don't believe a word I say. I do this just to give you an alternative to go look at other things, see what's going on. If you want to see what's going on geopolitically, guys like Scott Ritter and Colonel Doug and the two Larrys and Jimmy Haifong and the two Chinese professors and there's a whole bunch of other good, podcasts that have lots of interesting people. And you open your mind. You don't believe what they say, but you open your mind and you listen. Those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. And that's where you can have some growth in your spirituality, right? Not you don't have to, be a churchy person. I mean, churches are okay. They're a community. And if you have a good church, that's great. If you have a good synagogue, that's great. If you have a good temple, that's great, But it's the majority of people who are hooked into religions, it's more a cultural thing. It's like mommy and daddy were that, and grandma was that, and you kind of go there on the holidays, and you're more thinking about, when it's over and you'll go have a nice dinner, blah, 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 right? But if you have a good church that does good work, that's a great thing. And I've worked through many, 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 many churches, right, of all different sects and everything that had good people in them and were doing good service, helping people. That's a good thing to do. But if it gets just, clogged up in, status, that means it's all about you. It's, Solomon's tales in the Old Testament. These are really good things. And Acts and is another good one. And basically, Solomon he has this well-known thing, what's it called? Not Ego, but it's the name of a magazine. Oh, sometimes I got so much stuff stuck in my head, I forget things. So, not avarice, but it starts with an A. It's basically, it's the Greek word for breath, right? And what it means is you only have so many breaths in your life, so you shouldn't waste them, right? You shouldn't waste them on stuff like, the group, you shouldn't waste it on false gods. And false gods aren't like, some, thing, golden calf. The golden calf they're talking about is the money that you run after in your job, your career. I want to be rich and famous. That's the false god. I want to be, have a beautiful wife or husband. I want to have a big house and cars. That's the false god. It's not avarice, but it's close. When the guys like Saul, who became Paul, the Philistines, not the Philistines, the lawyers of the Mosaic law, the Pharisees. The Pharisees were always, trying to trick Jesus, and same with the sad sacks. They'd always, try to bust his bubble. And the one where they said, well, we have all these rules and laws, and the Mosaic, blah, blah, blah. Moses had 10 laws given to him by God. Really, there were 20, and then he dropped one of the things. Actually, he basically broke those things, and then when the ones that God gave him, Moses rewrote them. So the 10 Commandments that we have are really, that's why they call them Mosaic laws, because they really aren't God's laws, it's Moses. But anyway, all of that stuff is people getting caught up not in the relationship with God, and like I said, in the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, it's only 5 pages long. I think it's the shortest book in the King James of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament is the Torah. The Hebrew tribes had 3 books. They had the Torah, the Tabla, and the Kabbalah. Torah was for the everyday, right? And that was, when you take the Hebrew into Greek, into English, Torah translates into you suck. And if you read the Old Testament, pretty much it's this jealous God that is always pissed off about Israel. Israel is the nation of the Hebrew. It's, Isaiah, right? And so Abraham was the first guy to not bring the tribes together, but be the father figure, right, on earth, right? He was the first rock star. And there were minor prophets too, but he's the first. And Isaiah's the other guy who was ready to, kill his kid for God, and that's very much like the pagan religion of Baal. And those guys, it's a sect of Egyptian God that wants you to not just have a lamb or a goat or a cow offered to him. He wants you to offer one of those little babies you have, right? So what, God would do any of that? That's really? Come on. And what it is Source. Source has always been here, Before, and in the beginning, there was the word, Before all of that, before Genesis, Source was around. And Source was here forever and, always lived. I constantly talk to you guys about being conscious, intent I am, meaning in the moment, not in the past, not in the future, right here, right now. And that's Source. So we went from 4 to 1, really. You couldn't stick with this stuff, eh? And there's there's not a single thumbs up. Come on. So anyway, so Source has been there forever and not even conscious of being there, just there, right? But then consciousness came into Source and he went, whoa, what's going on? And he was just there as Source, right? And this is, again, if you read the Essenes and the Gnostic Gospels, they go in great detail of all this. And They themselves had different sects within those things that were mystery schools, and that's where Jesus hung out from the time he was born to when he was 30 and got on the road. So so there's that, and so when Source realized he was in the moment and was realizing in the moment, and so he wanted to have a reflection, an understanding. And again, that story is a repeat of Moses when the burning bush shows up and says, Moses, Moses, hey, buddy, come here. And Moses goes, what? No, I don't want to talk to you. No, Moses, I want you to go to Egypt and get the Hebrews out of Egypt. And he goes, why should I do that? I was there. I was the Pharaoh's, not his best. He loved me better than his son, and then I got dissed, and then I got called out by the Jews, and then I had to kill someone. I had to get out of there, right? And then I came here, and I came all the way to this side of Africa, and I found this really nice guy who's really got all these great books and understands all this great stuff. And I've been studying with him, and he's got 3 daughters, and I married one of them, and I'm having a great time. By this time, like when he was in Egypt, he had to get out of town when he was about 30, right? And then he took him a number of years to get up to where he was up in the mountains with the goats, and the nice guy who was really smart and had all these books and these 3 hot daughters, and so he married one and was there for 30 years. So he was almost 60 when the burning bush showed up. And he goes, I got a great life. Why should, I don't have to work that hard. I study things that are interesting. There are a lot of interesting people that come and go here. I got a great wife. I have a nice house. My only job is to keep an eye on the sheep at night, and I look at the stars, and I don't need anything more than this. I don't have to be a rock star. I don't have to. No. You in the burning bush says, no. You gotta go get those kids out of there. And he goes, why should I? And he goes, because I am and I am who I am. And Moses said, no. That's only Popeye says that. And basically, if you read the text, especially in Hebrew or Greek, that conversation is again an element of the source. And he goes, I need you and the Hebrews to be my people again, because I'm losing who I am. I'm like disappearing. Now, Source never disappears. And what happened? When Source found consciousness, Source started building, like in Genesis, and in the beginning, we're going to make man in our image, right? So that's Elohim. El is Source. Elohim is plural for these demigods that Source made that were creating the universe, right? And these demigods were made in a couple, meaning a feminine and masculine, not one or the other. You look at the Greek and Roman gods, they're individual, guys, girls, this, that, right? They aren't something that has a male and female essence, right? And one reason why people are getting so bent out of shape about transgendered people is that they're the closest thing to that. Now, they've always been around, but they're now popping up, right? So they have to, be, going after, right? Because they're dangerous, because they're closer to, state than what religions. Religions are, again, just these cultural business plans, right? Like I said, a good church or a good synagogue or a good temple, those are, you have good community there. That's great. I know, I've been in many of all of the above. And when I tell the Christian people I know that, I've spent some time in the Mideast and not like years and years in my whole life there, but, months and months and many different times doing different projects. And in Europe too, I would bump into Muslim folk who are really, really, I mean, their whole culture is based on hospitality, generosity, and temperance and patience, right? But once they kind of go past it, they're like, don't mess with them, right? So they pray 5 times a day, and they submit. They get down on the ground. They don't, like Baptists sit in nice, cushy, cushioned pews, right? And the guys are over there and the girls are over here, so they don't get, you know, swayed by their hormones, right? It's just you and God, right? So to diss people for the religion that they are in, that's probably one of the biggest sins, right? Just because they have a different name for God doesn't mean it's like a false God. So, now this is interesting. My thumbs up are bouncing between 6 and 0. Anyway, so we live in a very interesting times because everything is right in front of us. That's why Donnie Trump is great. All the other politicians, JoJo, Obama, Georgie, Porgy, and Dick, and Billy Boy and Reagan. Reagan wasn't so bad. Of all those guys, Reagan was, tried. He did some good things, right? But the instrument of those parties and stuff they had no control of any of that. You know, the thing about Donald Trump controls the MAGA and the Republicans. No, he's just a cartoon character in a game show host form. Anyway, so the real question is you. What are you doing with your life? So come on. No one wants to say, oh, look, somebody said something. What did they say here? Ooh, they said something wrong. I've been listening to you here for a few years now, Sensie Owl Bob, and I have to say, you truly are an exceptional specimen of the human race. Thank you. Keep it up. Sending lots of love from Serbia. Serbia, that part of the world is a beautiful place. I went to the Yugoslavian Olympics in '84 as a photographer. And when I was a photojournalist, my photography, it's like photojournalism is if it bleeds, it leads. No, my whole shtick was people. So I would, like when I went to the Olympics, so I was part of a thing called Magnum. It was a photo collective. It was like the UPI or something like that, right? So they would hook you up with, people who would hire you to go do something, right? And, it's kind of like somewhere between the electricians, the IBEW, but it was quite nice. So people, the members, you couldn't like just apply. You kind of had to be invited. Someone who was part of it had to bring you in, right? And my teachers, my real photo teachers. I mean, I've had a lot of photo teachers, but ones who like put me on that path and made me serious about it instead of a hobby. It's like one of my skill sets was Lisette Model and Cartier-Bresson, who were the publishers of Vogue and just real class running. So they had this beautiful. I think they taught at the New School in SVA and maybe even NYU. But they had this beautiful apartment right on where Broadway starts, right there at Washington Square, and right on let's see, it's the northeast corner. It's beautiful, takes up that whole corner, and it's got the big light of the park, and probably built in somewhere between the. It was a really nice building, right? And it was not old, but it had an elevator, and it was nice, beautiful. And all the apartments had their own little verandas, and probably built somewhere between the 40s and the late 50s, somewhere in there. And So they had a really nice apartment, and they would have a salon, right? And the members, their students, and the members of their salon, basically it was like Thursday or Friday, one of those days, you would shoot 10, you would shoot all week long, and you would pick out your 10 best images and print them on 11 by 14. It had to be 11 by 14, right? And you'd come with your nice little thing that kept the prints in there nice and flat and uncrinkly and unsoiled. And we'd show up, and they had this big, beautiful living room that had this like kind of couch that went all around, and they had a couple of coffee tables that were you could put stuff on, and but basically they had this really nice carpet, white carpet, that you would put your prints down, and everyone would sit around, and one by one you'd take your prints out, and what I loved about it was critique and not criticism. People would talk about your prints and discuss everything, like, how'd you shoot that? What lens you use? What's your f-stop? How'd you print it? Da da da. And then they discuss the aesthetic part of it, right? And they really wouldn't. I mean, if you were part of this thing, you had to be of a certain level. You couldn't have a crappy print, or you weren't invited back. You had to have your 10 best prints, and you had to be out there spending, at least 20 hours a week taking pictures and working in the darkroom, right? So yeah, I had a eye for people, and not, I wasn't like Steichen, or, I wasn't, and I wasn't about conflict. I wanted to take a picture that was an image of empathy. Meaning, you look at that picture, you would feel that person by looking at that picture. That was my shtick. And there weren't, Cartier-Bresson did that. Lisette Model kind of did that, but she liked form. She was really into form. So anyway, and I was the youngest. That's when I started to be called kid, because Lisette and Cartier were sitting in the park one day, and I would take the bus down. And in New York, back in the day, when you got on the bus and it was a dime to take the subway or the bus when I was a kid. And you put the dime in the busing, and you would say, can I have transfer, right? And so the transfer meant, if you were on that line, let's say, whatever line that was on Broadway, coming from uptown, downtown. Broadway goes downtown, or Lexington, or whatever. Like Park Avenue didn't have buses. Fifth Avenue had buses. Broadway had buses. I guess it's Fifth Avenue that runs into Washington, not Broadway. Broadway keeps going all the way down to the Battery. But anyway. If you got on that bus, you could ask for a transfer, and that meant you'd like hit your little bell, get off, and then do whatever you're going to do, and then you wait at the bus stop, another bus, and you have your little transfer, and you show them the transfer, and you can, and it's got it's, when they give it to you, it kind of, the thing's splatted out with the time and date, so you could use that thing all day long on that bus line and a few other bus lines that would cross over and go someplace else, right? So. The New York transit system was, I haven't been on it since 2011, but when they first built it, they did a really good job. But anyway, and America had the best mass transit of the world, from like the 1870s to like 1940s. Great. I mean, trolleys, subways, buses, you name it. There was. And all over the place. Every city had a pretty good mass transit. Now we don't have it at all. We just have highways and cars. And we're not going to have cars soon. And the gas won't be there. So that'll be interesting. We have no mass transit whatsoever anymore. Anyway, so I was, there was a guy named Adam Purple. You could go Google him. and they kind of give him a bad name, but he was like a war hero, brilliant guy, but he was a bohemian. He's totally, and a lot of people, oh, you're just a bum or a hobo, right? But no, bohemians were, I don't know if you ever saw Dobie Gillis show, right? And Maynard G. Krebs, who was a beatnik. Well, that's like the 1950s version of a bohemian. So Adam Purple was that. And he's the guy who, so I would be taking pictures of everything, right? And I remember, I guess I was 15, and I would take the bus, from my parents' apartment, and I would go, downtown Fifth Avenue, because there was I would just walk from 69th Street, and I'd go to the park, take pictures in the park, and get on the bus and go all the way downtown, and I could get off here, there, and everywhere, right? St. Patrick's, go see Cardinal Cushing. So anyway, I would take pictures the whole time. My dad gave me he had a Rolleiflex, a 2.25 camera where you kind of look down in it. It's not like a Leica, like you're looking through the lens, but it was almost. There were two lenses, so you look down and it had a big negative, 2.25, right, not a 35 millimeter. And so the bigger the negative was, I learned about a thing called depth of field, and that's when you and if you have a tripod, it works better. So you can stop it all the way down and then slow the speed. And if you can hold it steady, that's one thing. But otherwise, I had a nice little stick tripod for that camera that I could like fold up, and it would only be about this big, and I'd stick screw my camera on there. And it was almost like one of those things that you do a selfie for. I mean, I had a long little thing that I could hit put it up in the air, about 10 feet up in the air over my head, and take a picture, right? So I'm just doing stuff like that. And I use depth of field because when you use depth of field, you don't have to focus, right? Everything is in focus, like from the focal plane out into infinity. So if you're doing a sunny day and you stop it down to f/22 or a little higher or somewhere in the middle, you don't have to worry about focusing the picture, right? It's just a frame that you have to work with, and what you're going to take the picture of, right? So I was doing that in Washington Square, and I saw this guy, Adam Purple. He's all wearing purple. He has a purple bicycle, and he's playing chess. And in Washington Square Park, they have basically these concrete tables with concrete chairs that so anyway, I would take pictures of that, and that's where I met Adam Purple, because he was playing about 5 games of chess at once with these like college professors who thought they were hot, and they play with a clock, right? And the way he would play it is, you sit down, one guy goes click, right, and he would make a move, click, click, and so the way he played it was, you didn't have to play all the way to the end, but if he was getting you into a corner, like in like 5 or 10 moves, you're going to be, toast. And you have spent 20 minutes, and he's only spent 3 minutes, you lose. I think there was a number of moves. And if he was like 3 minutes and you were 20 minutes, that was it, right? And that was more his shtick of the game. But he would play it to the end till, he knocked your king over. And if he did that, so you'd have to put money to pay, right? $20. And as you were going along, if you thought you got to that point where, okay, I'm going to take your $40 because you've done 20 minutes and I've done, but you could put down another $40 because you think you're going to win. And he would get you all the way up if you're trying to win. If he knocked your thing over, he'd take $100. By that time, he had to have $100 on the table. And he would do 5 or 6 games at the same time. So we'd go there and be there for 3 or 4 hours. He'd walk out of there with like somewhere between $200 and $1,000, depending on how stupid the college professor was. And Adam Purple. Now and so he lived in abandoned buildings. He was the guy who showed me how to live in abandoned buildings. He says there are millions of them all over New York. They're all over the place, right? So you take the subway. We go up to the Bronx. We go into Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island City. Over near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It was just beautiful, amazing buildings that were abandoned, right? And if the windows were cinder blocked up, you knew the city owned them. And if the city was, so that's a city-owned building, right? The other ones that are just boarded up, that's probably still owned by a real estate company or a landlord or something, right? But if it's cinder block windows, that's the city owns it, right? So you break into the building in the back, and you basically put a mail slot in the front. You don't have a door. You come in through like a surreptitious way to get in, and but you have a mail slot, right? One that looks white against the concrete cinder block, but there's a number there, right? And the mailman, he knows the number of that house, and so if you send yourself a certified letter, right, and it goes in that thing and you keep it, that certified letter, because it has a stamp of the Postal Service saying what day it was sent to you and what time of day, and that shows that you've been there, right? And so that's one of the ways you can legally start taking the building. Now, if you can put legal electricity into that building, or if there is meters and power in there, but all of them are locked up, and you can get a utility company to turn on the meter, and you have an electric bill, that's like the gold standard of residency. So he taught me all about how to, and that's why in the 80s, when the homeless scene was so bad, we started Outstanding Renewal Enterprises, and David and Rolando and Marissa and a few others, and we took over 500 apartments, and I had a master electrician's license. I put legal electricity in all those buildings, and everyone who had an apartment had an electric bill. I said, listen, your electric bill is like, what, $20 a month? You keep paying that electric bill, you'll own this apartment. And that's what happened. That's why the Lower East Side is such a ritzy place, because all those people basically went from dirt, poor homeless people to, like, by the 90s and early O's, those pieces of property, those apartments were worth millions. And because we started our own credit union, and the way we set it up, if you were part of the housing authority that we had, you could be a member of our credit union. And if you were putting money into it, we gave you 5% interest per annum. And if you borrowed money to, like, fix the place up or send your kid to college or start a business, we would lend you the money for no interest, but you had to be a member of the credit union. And by doing that, in less than 20 years, we went from having the $45,000 we needed to start the credit union by New York state law. By 2011, when I went back to go to a wedding of one of my 128. Those were 128 kids I grabbed off the street. And basically, because I saw them doing something stupid that they would either end up in jail or dead. And I said, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to be my electrical helper, right? I always needed an electrical helper. And I said, I'll pay you $10 an hour. What? $10 an hour? This is 1972 to 1988. $10 an hour, And not only that, I'll give you a place to live that you don't have to pay rent. So Adam Purple taught me all that, right? And he also taught me how to ride the rails. We did that. That was kind of fun. And introduced me to the hobos, and also the mole people. He took me down underground to New York City. And anyway, so when I first met him, I would go down and hang out with him and take pictures of that, right? So one of these days was a Saturday, it was a weekend, Saturday or Sunday, and I was down there taking pictures, and this couple, you know, was sitting on the bench that kind of goes all the way around Washington Square. And so I was like going around taking pictures of this, that, and the other thing with my like little stick, pod, my not tripod, but one pod. Anyway, so they saw me doing this and like holding the camera up in the air, and I had a long, one of those releases for the shutter. Anyway, so I kind of sat down, and they kind of strolled over and sat down and started talking to me. And said, "Oh, you're a photographer, blah, 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 blah." And they both were saying, they didn't say, who they were, but they said, we live right in the neighborhood and we teach at, the new school, and we're from Europe, and we've been in New York for many years. We're New Yorkers. And you really, how old are you? And I said, I remember when I met him, I guess I was 15. I'm 15. And what? And what school do you go to? I said, well, I go to a prep school in New England, but it's like jail, and so we're there all the time. So instead of being there, we start school in October, and we get off the week before Thanksgiving, and we have from Thanksgiving all the way to the 10th of January, and we don't go to school. We come back home, and then from the 10th of January, we are there all the way up to February, March, April, the 1st of May, and then we come home. And so I have big chunks of time that I'm still in New York, and I don't have to go to school, but I do work. And they go, "Oh, you work? What do you do?" I said, "Oh, I'm an electrician. I work for Stoll Electric." And I said, "You're like employed?" And I said, "Well, they're more like my family, but yeah, I'm employed. Yeah, I'm pretty good. Like I've been doing it since I was 9 with them, and soon I'm going to be in the union." And that's when they said, "We have some electric work we need in our apartment." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so that Sunday they said, "Why don't you have you had lunch?" And I said, "No, I could eat something." So they take me up. They had a beautiful apartment, beautiful, 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 beautiful apartment. And they said, and they had all these, photos and paintings, and I knew something about art, and I said, is that a Monet? And they go, because I had already kind of been hanging out with Billy Kluver, who took me to all the museums and was like getting me into the art scene, art world, because he was on the board of MoMA. He was on the board of the Whitney. He was on the board of everything, right? And anyway, so I said, "Is that a Monet?" And they go, "Yes." "And this is a Picasso." I went, "What?" And so they said, "We're going to have this whole place painted. So we're going to take everything down. And we just have lamps. And they're okay, but we kind of want to change things a little bit because we want to have certain walls that we want it to, look like a gallery. We want it lit like a gallery, like an art gallery." I said, "Oh, I can do that." I said, "No problem. There's this new stuff called tracklight I think would be really great for you guys." And so I'm like, poking around the walls and looking at this and I said, where's your fuse box? And I'm looking about this and that. And I said, "Well, so what walls do you want to light up?" I said, "There's like 2 ways of doing this." I said, "You can do it like the, by the code of New York City, but in the code of New York City, there's this thing called safe but inadequate." They said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, so you have all these lamps around here, right? And they're all plugged into outlets, right?" And they go, "Yes." I said, "I can put track light up, and I can use like lamp cord, but heavier duty. And I can use this stuff called, what do I call that stuff? It looks like it's molding, wire mold. and I can use it to run down or sides and then bring it over to an outlet, right? And I can basically, there are these things that I can plug in to that outlet and then put into your switch that turns the light over your head that has these other buttons that will turn on these little boxes that I plug in. So you'll be able to turn on and off your track lights and dim them, and all your other ceiling lights and your lamps I can put on this. So wherever there's a light switch, I can put one of these boxes that are controllers, and you'll be able to control all your lights from one of those boxes, and I don't have to rip up your walls to put wires in them. But it's totally legal and it's totally safe and everything's UL approved, and that's called safe but inadequate. It's tempered because if you can unplug something, it's just a lamp. And I said, wow, because I think they had other electricians who were going to rip their apartment apart, and they'd have to replaster everything. And I said, you don't have to do any of that. So I can, run that wire mold and those wires and do all of that before you paint it. And those guys can come in and paint it, and then I'll stick up the tracks, and it'll be perfect. And so I go, wow. And I said, and it'll be relatively inexpensive, So because I think somebody said, oh, that'll be $1,000. This is like in 1965 or six. And I said, maybe I said, we're going to go down to the place where this stuff is, and you just pay for it. These are electric supply places, so it's not really expensive. It's wholesale kind of place. And in all these places, they know me, so I'll buy all the materials, you pay for it, and you give me, let's say $200. And they were like, really? I said, yeah, no problem. So they were like, so we had a nice lunch, and they were then telling me their story. So that, Lucette Modell, Cartier Bresson, and they're telling me stories after story after story. They started Vogue, and they're teaching here and doing that, and they're on the board of this, on the board of that. And they said, so, when you're doing that, they go, do you have a dark room? I said, yeah, I kind of have a dark room. It's like, it's like in my closet. And so you really don't have a dark room. I said, well, I develop my film and I print them. And so they go, there's this thing called New York Artists League. And in that, I wonder who that is. It's a message, so I'll look that up. And they said, we're going to get you into that because there are a bunch of people, mostly they're painters and there's all these great people so that's where I learned how to paint. Now, I was already drawing, and when I was 8, I wanted to be an architect, so my dad got me a drafting table and all those toys, and I got a book on how to, and my Uncle Steve, he was a engineer and a draftsman, and he also was kind of an architect, and he was a brilliant guy, and he did a lot of different things, and because he didn't come from the right side of the tracks, he worked for Ingersoll Rand and invented a number of things where he should have been but because he worked for them, he just got a salary. But anyway, so he's the guy who taught me how to be a draftsman and how to be an architect, and I was playing around with that when I was, about 8, 10 years old. Anyway, so Michael Steve, but he was in Long Island, so he gave me one of his enlargers and tank to put the film on, and a changing bag, so I could print, but I was doing it, in a closet. So they got me into this art and student league, and there was a bunch of people who were photographers, who were part of Magna, who were part of, the salon of Lucette Modell and Cartier Bresson. And so those guys actually taught me how to really be a photographer. They said, you have the knack, you have the eye, you have the, you are a good photographer, but, and these guys, half of them were photojournalists. Like Cartier Bresson, was a photojournalist, but he was an artist too. So, and they, who else? Oh, that's how I met Michael Savage through. There's a French guy who's a very strange kind of photographer. So he was part of that crew too. Anyway, so I was surrounded by some pretty amazing photographers when I was like 15. And for, at least 4 or 5 years, really 3 years, because until I got out of high school and then kind of started really traveling and going different places. But I was always part of their salon. And until they, keeled over and were no longer on the scene, I could just walk. If I came into New York, they were, those guys I would call up. They were one of the people. Hey, I'm in town. What's going on? So I was part of that scene, and that was a great scene, and especially in the 60s and 70s. It was pretty amazing. Alan, what was Alan's? He was the editor of The Village Voice. Nice Jewish boy, Alan, whatever his name is. And he took pictures of John Lennon getting assassinated. And they beat him up and took his film away. Because he was their photographer, right? And Alan introduced me to one of my wives, Jane Fire, right? She was a really great artist, musician. She had a punk band, a female punk band. They performed at CBGB's a lot, and a lot of Lower East Side clubs. And, so that's how I met Adam Purple, and that's how I met Lisette Modell and Cartier-Bresson and got into that art scene. And they kind of introduced me to Herbert Berghoff and Uda Hagen at HB Studios on 10th and Bank over on the west side. And that's how I got into the theater, right? And because I was there, they had this big old building. They had their theater school there, and it was like, about, at some point the inspectors were going to close. Everything was like, just bad. So I rewired everything for them, and they introduced me to Bob Goddard of Joshua Light Show and that whole scene, and that's how I got a job at the Fillmore East, right? And so that's how I got into rock and roll, and that's kind of what got me into nightclubs, right? So yeah, and if I have any real important skill set, is to be in the right place at the right time and not scared, not like, oh, who are you? I'm like, no. So I just would go and do stuff, right? Meet people. Hey, let's go do this, go do it. And that's how I met all those people. I didn't think of them, and they were all like, Cartier-Bresson got a Nobel Prize for the shot. There's a world-famous shot during the Spanish Civil War that he took. He figured out, he went down to where this group of the army was over here, and they were going to meet here and try to kill each other. So he stuck himself over where these rocks were, that he had a view where the guys who were the Republicans, not the fascists, but like the socialists, they were going to definitely come through this thing, and so the other guys were going to be definitely over there, and the first guy that came through there was going to get shot. So he put himself over here, and he waited for like 8 hours, and when the guy came through, click, 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 click. And that was like one of those pictures of like that little girl who got burnt up by napalm in Vietnam. It was one of those kind of archetypal pictures. But, all the imagery that comes out of the Gaza Strip is so horrific, and it's just nonstop that people, they've gone numb. But when Cartier put that picture up, no one saw anything like that. And so that's why it was, and it also was like, everyone had experienced the First World War, and the Spanish Civil War was like they're about to start the First World War again, and it was, and that's another thing. You look at that war, the First and Second World War, It's connected to the Spanish-American War. It's connected to the Indian Wars. It's all of the you know European guys who went to Africa to steal everyone's stuff, whatever you call that kind of wars, um, to today. And if you go study all the different, because all these points of places where it just went from here to here to here, and we're watching that now, and it's like a little going up the staircase of the war getting crazier and crazier in the Mideast, and to the point where it's going to be the end of the United States, because at some point Donnie's going to have to, because he's got all this hardware there, and he can't just take it back home. That would be the smart thing. To say, okay, we won, and yeah, you run the thing. We'll see you later. Bye, and just leave, and just take all their toys home, and not go back there, not have 18 bases all over the Mideast. And if Israel wants to be the badass, go ahead. It's the size of a postage stamp, and we should stop giving them money, and we should stop them from buying all our politicians. But is that going to happen? I don't think so. I mean, when Donnie came in and he had Neon Husk have douche destroy whatever left of our social safety net and all our deep state, which it is, and he destroyed it, and it's good that it's not there. But the way they did it, by just they didn't change any laws, they didn't really fire anybody. What they did was Elon would go into AID and on Friday, and he had all the passes and badges, and they'd let him in, and his kids, his computer kids, would just pull the servers out and take all those servers down to his big AI machine in Memphis, Tennessee, and then he takes all the stuff from Social Security and all the stuff from IRS and all the stuff from the State Department, because that's how AI is. It's an algorithm that just sucks up information, and that's how the machine learns. And so Elon took everything he could out of our government and took it down there and stick it in his machine. Now, he took those servers out, so that meant he did it on Friday and Saturday and left Sunday. And then on Monday, when people came to work, they'd slide their cards, and the door wouldn't open because the server wasn't there to open the door. And they'd call up, hey, why didn't the door open? And no, this phone number is not working now. You can't leave a message. Click. And after 2 weeks, they got a notice that they were fired because they didn't show up to work. That's how they got rid of, because they didn't have to go through Congress or anything. But douche was funded by Donnie's executive order. Democrats wanted to stop that. So he gets put into power around January, right? 10th, what it was, right? And he does all these executive orders that gets rid of everything that Joe did, because Joe didn't pass any real laws. He did everything by executive order. And all the things he did was crack the door open, so when Donnie got rid of JoJo's stuff, the door was open for him to kick it in and just destroy everything, right? And so if the Democrats were real, and they said, oh, Donnie's a fascist, blah, 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 right? No, Donnie's not a fascist. He's a game show host, right? He's a grifter. That's what he is. And that's what they should have been saying, And they could have pointed back, he was going through court. When he got sworn in as his first American president, it's like 49 felonies, right? And a judge, he could have gone to jail. He could have been, gotten, $500 million fines. He got no fines and no time. But he has, 45 felonies on him, or however many that he's got. But anyway, but he doesn't care, because he's just reading his script. So he's, gets in there the second time. He's got the, 2025 kids there. What do they call? whatever that very right wing nationalist organization that Teal is part of and Mr. Vote is part of. Anyway, but the Democrats by early February there was a to fund the government bill, and what we have been doing for the last 40 years is not voting on it, just kicking it down the can. Just have, okay, we'll give you enough money to run the government for another 4 months, right? So the Democrats who lost, and Donnie won, and he won the Congress and the Senate, if the Democrats really wanted to stop Donnie in his tracks, they could have said, no, we're gonna close down the government. We're not gonna, kick the can down, right? But they did. And so that 4 months, Elon with a chainsaw, and that's all people talked about. Oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. Because they weren't watching the other shit that they were doing that wasn't in their face, right? Oh, right. So in July, when they had to have another bill to fund the government, instead of passing that bill, they passed the big, beautiful act, and man, you should read that sucker. That's the thing that gave ICE $90 billion, and it took lots of they brought on the Genius Act, which now there are no like breaks for the AI research. I mean, there's some really things about turning our government again, not being fascist, but getting rid of all the guardrails and the norms, because it's not Donald Trump that we need to be, because he's right in your face. You see what he's right there. You're seeing everything he's doing, but he's doing it in such a way that you're being so numbed that it's the people who come next who are going to be scary monsters. And what I'm seeing is the next presidential election is going to be Michelle Obama for president and Buttigieg as vice president. And that's when you're going to see some fascism. Because all I have to do is see what happened with the Weimar Republic in Germany, which was the most, Germany between 1920 and 1928 was the most amazingly democratic, liberal, highly educated, sophisticated, cultured kind of place, which just allowed the Nazis to show up. Look at that period of time. It's pretty amazing. The National Socialist Party went from having like 2% of the vote to have 40% of the vote in less than 4 years. And so you're going to have, and people who are, like Bernie and AOC and the crew and all of that, and the guys, the mayor of New York, they are not a savior of yours, right? And they aren't what you have to realize the Democrats and Republicans are two wings of the same corporate bird. And if you ever go watch the first Blade Runner movie, right? That's the world you're going to be living in about 12 years. Good luck. But it doesn't have to be, because if people come together, and not like in a lot of my 128, a number, they all became really great, lawyers, doctors, judges, movie stars, electricians, business people, you name it, they just across the board were their best. I kind of helped them focus on being their best, conscious intent. So instead of ending up dead or in the jail, they rose above being in the street. Half those kids I found in dumpsters had no parents whatsoever. So you can do this. It's not rocket science. You can actually do this. And I've done it all over the world, and it wasn't me doing it. It was all these other people, and I was just kind of there, egging them on. I'm good at that. And what I'm really good is seeing, oh, that needs to be done. No one's doing it. Hey, anyone want to do this over here? Okay, no one's going to do this, but it's got to be done. No. Anyone want to help? I'll go do it, or I'll get some other people, get a crew, and get them plugged in to do it. So that's my skill set in that dynamic. But it is the most fun to do, but people don't. They get all caught up in what their status is and what they're doing, right? So anyway, 1 hour and 45 minutes, 2 people, 3 thumbs up, all good. Anybody saying any more stuff here? Let's see. Yesterday, breathe in Greek. So it's good. A few people are talking, and so anyway, Serbia. So I shot the Sarajevo Olympics. I think it was '84, and what I did, I was sent there about almost a month before the Olympics, right? And I just walked around Sarajevo and in the mountains because it was like, I think it was the Winter Olympics. And I basically just talked to people and took their pictures. And I would, I found, whatever editor or so would send me, and he or they would have a connect in Sarajevo with some kind of publishing company or some photo place or even a stationery store that takes your pictures. And so I would have somebody who had a dark room, and I'd give them my film. They develop it. I say I want so many prints of this, that, or the other thing, and basically I would print them up and give them to the people who I took pictures of. So they become my friends. I'd have dinner at their houses, and their kids, I'd talk to their kids and all the above. And Sarajevo was a beautiful city, and Yugoslavia was a beautiful town. And, good old Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton destroyed that place, right? And it was obvious when they did that, that's what the Arab Spring kind of broke into. So anyway, so Sarajevo, Serbia is kind of up in that neighborhood, and I bounced around in those hills and met people. And when you're nice to people and you do things like take their picture and then give them the prints, that's always been one of my major, getting my foot in the door. And being respectful of their culture, I have a pretty good ear. If I'm in a place where people are speaking a language, I can kind of pick it up. It's not my, home, but I can, and if I stay there, I get better and better. When I lived in Paris, I learned French. I don't really speak it anymore. I lived in Brazil. I learned Portuguese, and it's Mexico. I learned Spanish, So I still have an ear for it. I mean, I can kind of understand what people are saying, but speaking it, if I don't use my, I can barely speak now. I don't. I mean, if I were to go someplace and dip myself there and stay there, I could pick it right up again. I'm still good at that. So anyway, in my travels, and that's that period I was also. So I was part of Magnum, so I would take these, I would get sent to a place, and I would send them pictures too, I would get to negatives, and there was this one place, I was shooting this stuff for someone in Magnum who sent me to this other place. And so those people developed the film, developed the prints, and they had a machine that was like, a fax machine kind of, that could fax negatives and prints. So, and most of the prints that I had, these people, printed that I had, I gave away, right? I kept the negatives. And the nice thing about Magnum is I bet you my stuff is still there. Magnum still exists, because I found that a lot of my pictures were all over the place because I gave them away. I was part of a thing called, you could go on YouTube and look it up. It's called Collaborative Artist Projects. And we had a TV show on Manhattan Cable in the 70s and 80s called Potato Wolf, right? I was one of the producers of that. And so all the art stuff we were doing in the Lower East Side, I would take pictures. And so uh, Collaborative Artist Projects, what we were an umbrella that we were 501c3, and there were entities like PS1, the Knitting Factory, Franklin Furnace, Quando, and then we had two art galleries. Forgot what they're called, but if you were to look up collaborative artists, you would see them. So they had their 50th anniversary a year or two ago, and I had a lot of pictures that I took of that stuff, and I forget the woman who kept them all. And when I had the big show and the big party, I had a whole wall of my photographs. And it was quite interesting because a friend of mine called me up and Mary, what was Mary's last name? Kiki Smith is part of that scene. A whole bunch of Judy Riffick was part of that scene. Alan Moore. Andy Warhol was kind of part of that scene, but he had his own scene. I mean, Andy Warhol was part of every scene. He was amazing. He really was an amazing guy. Anyway, so they had this big show, and it's not No Say No. That was another gal we had. It wasn't The Shuttle. That's another one. It wasn't Sixth Sense. It was... If you went online, I'm sure they'd tell you what art gallery it was. And anyway, so I had a big wall of all my pictures, and everyone's going, "Where's Al?" Well, I'm like out in the middle of the woods. I had no idea what was going on. And so anyway, everyone was, "Oh, is Al dead?" And so there was a guy from the New York Times who called me up about a month after that show was. And I heard that there was a show and that people said, "Oh, why didn't you get here?" So I don't have a car. I couldn't, unless you were going to come and get me. I'm living, on a very limited budget. I do. I live on $400 a month. And, I used to let PayPal, but I don't believe in PayPal, it's the PayPal mafia. Anyway, so, God provides, that's for sure. Source always provides for me. But anyway, I get this call from this guy from the New York Times, and he goes, "Is this Al Bob?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, I'm from the New York Times, and this big show for collaborative artists was, and you had all these pictures there, and everyone thought you were dead. So my editor, who knew you, told me to do an obituary for you." And then some other people said, "No, Al's not dead. He's in Virginia." And and I wasn't in Virginia. I was in Tennessee. But anyway, so they came and found me. He didn't come, but he got my phone number and called me. And he said, "So I just, we were going to put your obituary in the New York Times, but now that you're alive, we're not going to do that." I said, "So, but you're going to put that in your little file?" "Oh yeah, so when you die, we'll have, we'll add a few more things or whatever you're doing. But your story is so interesting." So we talked for a good long time. And so he read me my obituary. So I think I'm the only guy who's ever heard his obituary for the New York Times, before. I'm sure other people, I'm sure a lot of those people who they put in there were really famous. They keep their obituary toasty, just ready for them. But anyway, that was fun to have your obituary read to you over the phone from the New York Times. So anyway, that's a bunch of stories. 3 thumbs up, thank you. And some people have said some nice things, and thank you very much. And see, what's this person saying here? Yes, you're right. Stop it. I don't want to report the message. Cancel. Yep, destroying the American people. I mean, they've always destroyed the American people. It's just that we are indomitable. But we are in a period where we are asleep. And the Clinton seat, who's ever visible, they're just cutouts, you know? The people who really pull the strings, you don't see them. They're not even human. You know, go look at David Icke's channel. You know, he goes on about the reptiles. That movie, They Live, you know, that's kind of where it is. You know, that's what movies do. They actually kind of put it out there just so it's like in your subconscious there, right? It's like programming. Yep. But none of any of this matters because this is all kind of an illusion. It's like, the Matrix is very pretty much what it is. You're in somebody's bathtub somewhere, just being an ever-ready battery. The real thing is you are the decider. You can change the world by changing your life. I'm the little pebble in the pond of the World Wide Web. I don't need to be a gigantic 8 million. A number of times, those same people, because I work for them, on many different levels. When I was the itinerant scholar, I worked for them. When I was apprentice to Billy Kluver at the Council on Foreign Relations, I was working for them, right? I went to the prep school with, Eddie Merrill, Ricky Lynch, Alex Orb, every corporate entity, family I went to school with, the Kennedys, you name it. Joe Kennedy was my roommate, and he was like dumber than a sack of rocks, F.L. Kennedy was very sweet, They came to take him out to dinner, and because I was the roommate, don't you want to come? I said, sure. And, Robert Kennedy, the boy who's, head of our, food and drug thing, he was he was a teenage boy, like probably maybe 4 or 5 years older than me, and they were all just, I'd look at them, and the only person who was a real human being was Ethel and the daughter who was somewhat autistic, right? And so, but the other kids were like I said, Joe was just, I read a lot, so I'd be over in my little bed with my little high-intensity lamp just on my book, and why don't you go to bed? Why are you reading a book? I said, well, reading a book is good, I'm interested in this stuff. He goes, I don't need to read. I'm a Kennedy. That's what he said. I don't need to read. I'm a Kennedy. Anyway, so what really matters is what you do with your life, right? Now, I'm a psychosocial cultural forensic. I'm really a shamanic psychosocial cultural forensic anthropologic alchemist, an art party ringleader, cultural provocateur. That's my title. And what does that mean? I've been having a good time, that's for sure. Even being old and busted up, I'm still alive, All the things that I'm like got aches and pains over are like all the crazy things I did. And I survived them. And I can still walk. The more I walk, the better everything feels. When I stay stuck in one place too long, it's hard on my butt, hard on my legs, hard on my knees. But I'll be around for as long as Source needs me, right? I'm here to serve. I'm a griot. Tell you the story. That's what I'm here to do. Well, thank you for everyone being here. Thanks for leaving these messages. go back and look at the other shows and make comments. I'd love to see comments on my shows. They're all there. They're all kind of fun and interesting. They're all, kind of have the same little drift, but just be aware. Have that conscious intent of everything you do. Right? Don't try, do. You don't have to be perfect. Just do your best. The other thing, conscious awareness. See that moron 4 blocks before they gets to you, so you can just walk the other way. On won't even know that you were there because you were already down the road. Those are the 2 things you have to develop right now, and then start looking at people more than just the surface. See, like I was in a store today, and so there are a bunch of Bible people here, and this is one guy who had a big churchy kind of thing, and had a rich guy who kept buying books and giving him Christian books to give away, right? So that minister guy can't do it. So the rich guy just leaves it into the minister guy's beat up car, and that's like my warehouse. And I just, like, when I go out and about, I have this big kangaroo coat that I can stick 5 or 6 books in my pocket, and I just kind of go around. And in this one place I was at, they were helping me out, and I was so I read their palms, and they were all, and the person who's the head manager of the place owns, I don't know if she owns it, but she's runs it, that's for sure. So she's a real hard case, but I've known her a good long time. And so every time I come in, she gets really sweet and soft and brings me into her office and makes me a cup of tea, and we talk about stuff because I've known her a long time, and she always, she can get wound up about stuff. So I'm always like, oh, I'm so glad, and I always have a nice little Bible book, and I give them to all her things, and I talk to people. So she goes through staff pretty quick, and so because she trains them up, and then they kind of get the idea of what that is, and then they move on to a better job. And so, but that's part of the shtick. But anyway, so I was there, and I read everybody's palm, and they were just kind of blown away. And they said, how do you do? Are you psychic? I said, no. I said, everyone is like Mr. Potato Head. There's 5 eyes, 5 nose, 5. So when I read your palm, you got, 1,800 lines in your hand, but there are about 12 that are important from my observation. And then there are about, within those 12, there's another 5 adjuncts. So you have about 78 different component parts that you can go on about, right? So what I do is I look at your palm, and I will say, oh, you are, passive aggressive, or you're, very, I just kind of go on, oh, you worry too much, or you're this or that. And basically, it's like Mr. Potato Head. I mean, there's certain patterns, but what I'm really looking at is their physical body tells. Because when I start talking about stuff that they could be, and I'm looking at how they cross their legs, or hold their arms, or pull on their hair, or their eyebrows, or pick their nose, whatever, right? There are all these tells that I look at. Anyway, so this one girl, she goes, how do you do that? Are you psychic? I said, no. I said, everyone's like, I just did 4 of you. If you were listening to me, you would have heard that I was talking about 10 different character traits, and I was looking at the different levels of how you deal with that character trait. And one connects to another in a different way, and it's like Mr. Potato Head. But as I tell you that, what I'm really looking at is your body language. So this one girl who was kind of all made up, and she looked really nice, and she was sitting in a chair. She had her legs crossed this way and her arms this way, and I just deconstructed every tell she had, and she was just, her mouth was, and her friends were, that's just like what she, And I said, and she goes, how do you do that? And I said, well, you do something for 50 years, and you use it as a tool within the work that you do. That's a lot of practice. And so, I'm pretty good at it. And why do you think your boss whenever I walk through this door, she comes out of her little office and invites me into it there and makes me a cup of tea, right? Because she always has a ton of questions to ask about what's going on within her business and da 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 da. And they're like, and so the three I was talking to were like newbies. They had been there maybe 3 months, right? The other ones are there, 5 years, 10 years. But once they get kind of good at what they're doing, they kind of go up the ladder in that business, right? They go to another place. And the lady who runs that facility, that store, um, other people support her because she kind of pushes well-trained people into their situation, right? She's almost an employment agent, right? And so that's what she. So anyway, that's how I get to know it. So in this little town, I know a lot of people like that. Lawyers and judges and policemen and you name it. I get to know everybody, and because they at a certain point, oh, let me read your palm, and they're like, oh, totally freaked out about that, and then I give them a Bible book, and they're freaked out about that too because it's exactly what they've been needing to read, and then they come and talk to me about stuff, and that's every town I go into. That's kind of what I do, right? So whether it's a big city or a little town or just a hamlet, it's kind of what I do. So anyway, okay, kids, I'll catch you later. What happened to all my thumbs up? Come on. Anyway, I'm gonna go. What time is it? Oh, 10:30ish. Okay.